Hey there, I'm Aaron Franklin from Austin, Texas. I work at a little place called Franklin BBQ, and I also happen to do barbecue pits. This is the Franklin BBQ Pit. We've been building them for a number of years now. Been working on the design for years, been prototyping for hundreds and hundreds of models, but alas, here we are, and I want to talk about why it's designed the way it's designed and why it cooks the way it cooks. So let's get started. So the Franklin BBQ Pit is purely a result of me cooking, and it's built from the inside out, and it's designed with airflow in mind, and it's really, this thing is meant to cook the perfect brisket, to get the bark just right, to render the fats just right. So I want to talk about why that works like this. First thing is, you may notice on the door, it says Franklin. That's because, well, I thought it would look cool. And then these little things down here, these are the air vents. And this is kind of designed like an internal combustion engine. You've got an intake and you've got an exhaust. Well, the exhaust is obviously the smokestack. Therefore, this is the intake. And this was really, in the design process, this was the one thing that took longer than anything else. I can't even count how many doors I've made and cut different size holes, different shapes, all the different stuff. And the idea behind it is that this thing is designed to burn super duper clean. You'll notice there's no damper on it. That's because I don't want you to build a dirty fire. A fire needs air, and it needs the proper amount of air. So if you got a fire in here, these vents allow the proper amount of air that always pulls. You'll see a properly designed barbecue pit has a good smokestack. That creates a vacuum. So you can't push air on a fire, you have to pull it. And that's what these holes do. So say you've got a fire inside this firebox. The air is coming in here, it's hitting the coals, it's hitting the fire, and the fire never gets dirty. It always burns clean. It's always got a high combustion temperature. That's where you get those good barbecue flavors. That's where you get the sweetness from the wood. You don't get nasty, bitter flavors. It's all about this airflow. So you notice the back door on the firebox is made out of 3/8. So you notice it's back trimmed. There's a little bit of slack in these hinges, and that's because each heat cycle, when you build a fire, this fire is going to be 600 degrees in here. So this metal is going to change, it's going to warp a little bit. So you want a little bit of give right here. So that's why the hinges are like that. That's why there's a little bit of a gap, because as this moves, it'll tighten up. And then if we go into here, we've got this snazzy little latch right here. Fits the curves and everything. It's really meant so you can just kick it up with your foot. It's easy. But this little tab has a little bend in it. So that's so you can close it and it always fits smooth. It doesn't fit tight. You don't want them to fit tight. This part moves around a whole heck of a lot. So that's kind of the design for the firebox door. Like I said, it took a lot of rounds to get this perfectly perfect, but I'm super happy with it. Alrighty, so we've got this fire, everything's working just fine. So we've got this super thick door, we've got a double walled back plate. Inside here, there's no actual insulation, but it is air insulated. There's a concentric liner that we roll from the inside, and then we roll this piece on the outside, and it turns out air is a great insulator. So I'm calling this semi-insulated. It works real good. The fire's swirling around, it's burning clean, it's doing its thing. It's coming up to this point, and this is one of the things that really makes a Franklin Pit. There are other things, and we'll talk about that. But we've got this opening right here, the flames coming in, and what's going on, water pan, talk about that too, is we've got this warm, stagnant air right here, and then we've got a massive amount of airflow. And if we look at the details on this, the bottom of this is polished, it's all rounded off. Everything's built like an engine. It's built like a little Maserati. Lots of airflow, lots of fluid dynamics going on in here. But we've got this warm, stagnant air here, and we've got really hot, fast-moving air here. So it's kind of like a bimetallic strip. You've got this thing, and it's moving fast here, it's moving slow here, so it makes the air start to curl. That's really what this is designed for. It's also a shelf for a water pan. We've got a water pan right here, and a snazzy manual too, and all the wrenches and stuff. Good stuff. But the water pan sits right here, so it gets a lot of heat right here, keeps moisture introduced to the cook chamber. Not too much though. Air moves over here, it starts to curl, and then at this point, the reason why all this stuff is designed is because we've got this vacuum, right? We've got all this air coming out, and I think a lot of people tend to think that air or heat just moves straight across. Well, it doesn't. Things just don't work that way. It starts to move around, and if we shut the door, there's just a little bit of air gap in here, and I really prefer an offset pit to have some stuff going on because you need a little bit of nuance in there. You need to learn your tools. So with the air going up out of that chute, it also tends to pull in cooler air here, which more times than not, depending on the climate and the weather, makes the air come in and it starts to spin. So it'll curl this way. And this is why this is kind of the sweet spot on a Franklin pit. Everything cooks faster here. You've got air moving around, all this chaotic airflow, smoke particulate, introduced moisture from the water pan. And depending on how you arrange your meat, that also changes the airflow because you're putting something in there that air hits and then it has to curl around. So this is all part of the cook. This is all part of the nuance too. So you've got air moving around here. We've got a hard vacuum from this smokestack, so we use this ellipsoidal head that we press. So again, you don't want hard edges. Air just doesn't hit something because it has to figure out a way to get around it. So when you polish and port everything like an engine, and when you have a good path for this air to go, everything's swirling around. So really, between the smokestack collector, the ellipsoidal head, which takes a lot of work, it's really not easy to build this stuff, and this heat shelf, and the way the Firebox works, and you've got this airflow, how you treat the air in there is really what gets your barbecue good. It's what helps your fires burn clean. It's what gets you a good bark on your briskets. It's what gets you good color on everything. It's what gets you those good flavors. So that is essentially a Franklin pit. With the design of this thing, you've got all this air flowing right here. This is the sweet spot. This is where things cook the fastest. This is where they cook the most efficiently, and that's why the thermometer is right here. So as we're moving around here, a couple questions. We've got this handy dandy little notch right here for thermometer wires. If you're cooking, you want to know the internal temperature, wire goes out here. We've also got this grate height. And one of the things that's always really driven me nuts is when you're cooking and the grate's too low or it's too high. This is meant to be work table height. So that's kind of what determines the height, the length of the legs, the size of the casters, all this stuff. But you know, the grate height, the shelf height, the smokestack collector height, that's really, you know, the design for that came from trial and error. So you've got this heat that comes out here, and everything is measured from the geographical center of a brisket. So say you've got normal sized brisket, it's about 4 inches tall. So the last 1 inch of the thermometer probe is 2 inches above the grate. The grate is meant to be halfway at this point. This comes out 2 inches, and then this is settled just a little bit lower to help pull some of that heat down. So it's all meant for fire, it's all meant for smoke, and everything is, you know, pretty specifically designed to be at a certain height for optimal performance. So with all this airflow and everything going on in here, smokestack, firebox, the Franklin BBQ Pit is really designed from the inside out for positive airflow and to also really encourage clean fires and good flavors. It's got a few other details on the outside I'd like to talk about as well. The big one that is kind of a cool thing, a lot of cookers don't have these, but when you're in and out of a barbecue pit all the time, if this handle spins, man, what a cool feature. And this one, oh, it spins. It spins real nice. And as we kind of go through here, we're looking at the craftsmanship of these welds. We've got these hinges. So the hinge design is also pretty interesting. There's no stop, there's no counterweight, there's no clunky stuff. It's all kind of meant to have clean lines on the outside, but there are door stops built into the hinges. And if you go on the back, you may also notice that it's a beautiful S-curve, the way everything just kind of flows. There's really, the years that I've spent building and designing these things, I feel like there's no detail left unturned. The design stuff is so cool, from the hinges to the spinning handle to exactly where the thermometer is. It just pops right in there. You always, you know, it's meant to stay loose for all these heat cycles also. So just put it right there. But if we look at the ellipsoidal head, the relationship on all the stuff, the clean lines of having a blind weld on the back, the weld lines coming up here, the smokestack, it comes unbolted when you buy it. It's inside. It comes with a little wrench too. So you put this thing on. The inside of the smokestack is burnished, so it doesn't collect any soot. It's also extra tall, so we have positive airflow that goes through the firebox right there. Really, the intention for a Franklin BBQ Pit is to last 100 years. Like, this is the kind of thing you buy, you pass down to your kids, they pass it down to their kids. It's kind of, in the back of my mind, I've always kind of treated Franklin BBQ Pits like grandma's cast iron skillet. So we use really thick steel. If we look at the back, you know, we've got a lot of heat on the back of here. This back firebox door and the outside piece is 3/8, doubled up with 5/16 on the inside. So that's super thick. Got an 11 gauge sleeve that goes over a 1/4 inch concentric liner on the inside, and that's what creates that 1-inch air gap in there. So it is semi-insulated. 5/16 again, 5/16, and then we laser cut all the cook chamber stuff out of a flat piece of steel, and that's 1/4 inch, and then we roll it. Reason why we roll it is because pipes aren't perfectly round. So this, another fine detail, allows us to make a perfectly round cook chamber, weld seams on the back to relieve tension on the door, and that helps us line up this ellipsoidal head that we also have pressed. And these ellipsoidal heads are about 5/16. It's scheduled, so it's not a nominal thickness. So the smokestack collector is made out of 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch flange, 3/16 inch pipe. This thing is super duper built to last. It's not going anywhere. You know, really, a Franklin BBQ Pit is kind of my version of a rat rod. It's meant to patina, it's meant to change over time. Each time you do a cook, it tells a story. You get a little dark spot here from a fire, you get a drip right here. You know, when I started getting into barbecue, one of the things that I really, really loved, and I still love it, is the old pictures of like a messed up screen door at a barbecue restaurant, or these old brick pits that just have layers and layers of just like stories and smoke and, you know, like blood, sweat, and tears kind of thing. So I think for a Franklin BBQ Pit, for the steel to gradually change, it maybe gets a little rust over here, oil it up, super no big deal. But just the beauty of how something like this patinas over time, I think it's just amazing. But that's kind of why these things are done like this. And that's also why we spend so much time on these crazy welds, blind welds here, cutting the threads for this, doing the hinges a certain way. It's really meant to be looked at so you can see the layers. You're not trying to cover up anything, hence the trim that's on the back and stuff like that. But so that's essentially the outside of it. We come down here on the legs, working down the legs. This is 2-inch schedule 40 pipe. And as one would guess, a Franklin BBQ Pit is pretty gosh darn heavy. So I couldn't really find any casters that were strong enough, so we built our own. We lathed the parts from the inside, we designed these, we cut them. It's got a little flame in there, stainless, cast iron wheels. And for the ease of moving around, we put 2 stationary casters on the back, so the front ones swivel, so that way you can pick it up. It's pretty heavy in the back because of the Firebox, so you can pick it up, and it's a lot easier just to move around like that. Got this bolt-on grate right here, and it happens to get a badge, and each one is individually numbered. The general overview is no detail left unturned. I've been thinking about this stuff for so many years, and I've been building them for so many years in the shop, testing them at the house, playing with them out in the field. This thing is really, I can't imagine anyone else that's put more legwork and time into design and function, you know. And to top it all off, the Franklin BBQ Pits are handmade here in America with all American steel. Boom.